Sometimes more doesn't mean better. Haste is one of the worst enemies of any NBA franchise, capable of wrecking the course of a team that's already destined to achieve great goals, just to accelerate a rebuild with trades that really aren't necessary. A recurring story that happens all too often. But if done correctly, it can also end up being a blessing. The Houston Rockets, in fact, are the perfect example. The seemingly overpaid signings of Dillon and Fred VanVleet to improve the record and performance during a season in which Houston will be without its first-round draft pick are paying off. The Rockets find themselves in playoff contention in a very tough Western Conference a couple of months into the season, and the team's young pieces like Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, or Jabari Smith are progressing in a big way. But this is not the norm. In fact, Houston's current situation is an exception. That's why the San Antonio Spurs should not be in a hurry. The NBA is a league driven by stars, and the truth is that the one they have on their roster could end up being the brightest one. But absolutely no franchise that owns one of the top 10, maybe 15 players in the league is willing to send these superstars to other teams. In fact, not only is the price of superstars exorbitant, but the price of players with potential who have a chance to make it is getting higher and higher. Not to mention the first or second year players whose slightest chance of becoming a superstar drives GMs all over the league crazy. After a start to the season well above expectations, in which the Spurs defeated Phoenix on 2 different occasions for a record of 3 wins and 2 losses, San Antonio's performance has stagnated. As of today, the team's gone on a long losing streak, ranking near the bottom of the Western Conference. But as I said, this aspect shouldn't set off alarm bells. I know we're tired of hearing it, but the Western Conference is really crazy. Many fans predicted that the Blazers, Jazz, Spurs, and Rockets were the only 4 teams whose mission to reach the playoffs seemed quite utopian. However, as we said, Houston's exceeding in all expectations, so it could be said that every victory costs sweat and blood. And let's face it, beyond Wemby, how many Spurs players would be in a contender's rotation? Popovich has a good core of young players with Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, and Jeremy Sochan, plus some more experienced players like Zach Collins or Doug McDermott. But beyond these names and perhaps Trey Jones, the Spurs lack NBA talent to rest their good players. Besides, of course, these young players are in the process of maturing, and their impact on the game doesn't always translate into victories. Leaving aside the Frenchman, probably the best player in San Antonio today is Devin Vassell. The shooting guard is having a very efficient season, shooting 50% from the field and 43% from three-point range, which is allowing him to average 17.3 points per game. A player who has no problems creating his shot, but whose evolution could be multiplied in the case of improving his playmaking. Keldon Johnson is a player who's made great progress in this aspect. The former Kentucky player is averaging 4.5 assists per game, an increase of 1.6 compared to last season, while reducing his number of turnovers by 33%. A two-way forward who's shown progression in each of his seasons with the Spurs, although this year he is experiencing a drop in his shooting rate after the arrival of Wemby. But the most special piece accompanying the Giant is none other than Jeremy Sochan. After demonstrating his versatility to defend players of virtually all profiles, Popovich has opted to start the sophomore at point guard. An experiment that's yielding good results, as Sochan has managed to double the number of assists per game since last season. But what undoubtedly generates more excitement among San Antonio fans is the fact that Jeremy's averaging 41% in three-pointers during the season. A player who, well, he's never really been known for his shooting ability. However, it's likely that by the time the Spurs manage to pull off a breakout season, which they should in the near future, the team will have lost some of these pieces. And that's not a problem. There are many factors that can lead to a player's departure from a team, whether it's at the will of the franchise or the player. But as long as San Antonio manages to keep Wembanyama, anything should be possible. The start of the season has been satisfactory for one of the most hyped and judged rookies of all time. Victor's averaging 19.3 points, 9.3 rebounds, and 2.3 assists per game, with an improvable shooting efficiency of 44% from the field and 28% on three-pointers. These percentages will increase progressively until they reach the level of the Frenchman's talent, but the truth is that his defensive performance has been quite impressive. The center's averaging 3.25 stocks per game, a joint statistic that adds the blocks and steals. And this figures him no more and no less than 5th in the entire NBA, behind only Anthony Davis, Brook Lopez, Herbert Jones, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Wemby's having a defensive impact befitting a player who should contend for Defensive Player of the Year after playing 12 games for his entire career. Victor certainly has a very special set of traits, which also you can see in our latest analysis, but there's bad news. Like most superstar sensations at the beginning of their careers, Popovich, the Spurs, and Wemby need more time to grow. No, this is not a criticism, it's what needs to happen. In fact, it may be a long time before we really know what the Frenchman's ceiling is, and until then, we won't know the best way to use a player with those special traits. The good news, if there's one thing the Spurs have, it's time. Do you know how many picks San Antonio has in the next 3 drafts? 17. In addition to owning all of their future first-rounders, the franchise has the Raptors and Hornets lottery-protected first-rounders for this upcoming draft. Also next season's Chicago Bulls first-rounder and Atlanta's unprotected first-rounder. Picks from teams that aren't going through their best moments and whose value rises as time goes on. Not only is the draft capital the franchise has amassed over the past few seasons one of the most promising aspects, but the franchise's current payroll is also very healthy. Beyond Devin Vassell's multi-million-dollar extension that kicks in next season, the Spurs have hardly any overpriced contracts. Keldon Johnson signed a declining contract, a somewhat rare NBA deal that'll allow Brian Wright to enjoy more maneuverability in the franchise for the next few seasons. And the team's third highest contract is that of Devontae Graham, who will pocket $24 million in total the next 2 seasons, but will serve to free up cap space after the 2024-2025 seasons. Yeah, the Spurs will have a lot of money to spend. These 2 aspects mean that San Antonio's future remains bright, regardless of the outcome of this regular season, which could also relegate them to the bottom of the standings and one of the top spots in the June 2024 draft. And there are more than a few quality prospects who will make the jump to pro basketball in this season's class or next season's class. Forward Cooper Flagg is one of the most hyped players in all of high school basketball, but there are reasons to believe this hype. Another unique player who defines the concept of versatility. He was named Gatorade Player of the Year with incredible averages of 21 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists, and 4 steals per game. Ace Bailey and Dillon Harper are so far the other prospects of the 2025 class that seem loaded with talent, while Alexandra Sarr, Ron Holland, or Stephon Castle could be very interesting options for the Spurs in the draft if they get one of the first positions. Wemby's upside is that it's very difficult to find players who are incompatible with him. Even Sarr, the 7'1" French center, could be a good paint partner. In fact, Victor's playing forward next to Zach Collins, who, by the way, is having a very good season. His profile's so atypical and adaptable that he seems like the perfect piece to build a winning team of virtually any type around him. But we have to get used to something. Surely from now on, trade rumors will not stop popping up around the Spurs. Rumors that usually come from journalists who are very impatient with a process that has to allow the team's culture to prevail among a very young group of players, but that on many occasions are meaningless. Coach Pop has to allow his players to get the experience they need to establish a system that allows them to win regularly. And they really have no reason to overshadow the growth of their younger pieces with other players who are literally at their prime and have a completely different schedule. Although, well, we already know that sometimes it's very complicated to say no.